today I am thrilled to have a very, very special guest, Desmond Meade. Desmond is a former drug addict who was homeless at one time, who led the campaign for a constitutional amendment to have felons' voting rights restored. He is the executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, the author of the book Let My People Vote, and the winner of a MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant. We are really fortunate to have with us today Desmond Meade.
Make sure that you're giving a voter identification card to a qualified person. That does not rest on a third-party voter registration organization. It does not rest on the individual. That burden sits squarely, right, on the state of Florida.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
Welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Cam, that's me. Today I am super excited to have a special guest, Desmond Meade, the executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. He is a civil rights activist and a superstar who has received international accolades for his work to restore voting rights to felons, who we will refer to as returning citizens throughout this program in deference to you and your work. Welcome, Desmond.
Dara, how are you? It's a
Uh,
pleasure to be with you this morning, right?
Yeah, it's great to have you with us. Let's talk a little bit about how your life has changed over the past. Well, it's changed significantly since you and I first met about 15 years ago or around then, but many gifts that you have given to the world and that you have received. Tell us a little bit about your history and what you're doing, and then we'll talk about Amendment 4.
Wow. Okay. Well, when you mentioned that we have met, what, over 15 years
I
ago,
think so.
man, I just feel so dated right now. But you're right. So much has changed. And I'm still really like processing, a lot of this stuff, because, I've gotten a lot of, you know, accolades, whether it was, Time, one of the 100 most influential people in the world, gotten the MacArthur Genius Award, and numerous recognitions, not only throughout the state of Florida, but throughout the country. But I'm still processing because when I think of Desmond, I still think of I'm just an ordinary guy, that I guess was just in a position to do extraordinary things during extraordinary times. You know, um, One of the things I used to tell people that when I had first received the honor of being one of the 100 most influential people in the world, I
That was
remember
Time
attending the
Magazine.
game.
That was Time
Yeah,
Magazine. I'm
the
sorry, I
Time
didn't mean to
magazine.
interrupt you.
Yeah, and I remember, I went to the gala in New York, and I was speaking to some Time executives, and I was, kind of like playfully berating them, saying that they made a big mistake because they put Dwayne the Rock Johnson on the cover of our edition, right? And I was like, you guys should have put me, not Dwayne the Rock Johnson, right? But what I explained to them, and I tell folks is the reason why I said that was because I think that, you know, if I would have been on the cover, so many people would have seen that cover and realized that you don't have to be a movie star, you don't have to be a billionaire, you don't have to be an athlete or even a politician to have an impact in your community and your state or even the world. That if that guy Desmond, who once suffered from drug addiction and homelessness and was previously incarcerated could have an impact in the world significantly enough to be named among the 100 most influential, then that means that anyone looking at that magazine cover have the potential to do great things in this world. And I think that's so important. And so, you know, when I think about everything that has transpired since we met, man, it has been amazing. But I'm excited because there's so many people that's like me that have an opportunity and have the potential to experience the same things.
One of the things that I really admire about you is you have always maintained such an upbeat attitude and always looked for, I am a glass half empty gal. I'll just straight up admit it. I'm not going to lie. I am a glass half empty. And, part of that is because of my life experiences. But you are always looking for the positive in things, and I've always admired that about you. I want to talk a little bit about Amendment 4, which you led the charge on that campaign to a constitutional amendment in Florida. Voters approved it overwhelmingly, and that restored voting rights to felons who have completed after they complete all terms of their sentences.
Hmm.
And the legislature passed a law implementing that amendment, even though there was a discussion about whether or not they needed to. They decided they needed to, and they required, so under the Florida law, you have returning citizens only can get their rights back to vote after they have paid any court fees or fines that are outstanding from their felony convictions. That opened up a whole Pandora's box of woes. I was, tell the listeners that I was there standing next to you right after the legislature passed that bill and finalized it. And you never said a negative word about it. But you and your buddy Neil Voles, you in particular, I will never forget that image of the look on your face. I mean, you looked grief stricken. You really did. And I'm wondering if you can tell me now. You didn't at the time, but I'm wondering if you can tell me now how disappointing that was for you at that moment.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to that moment, and I can tell you that I was, I think, more disappointed in the process than in that moment per se,
Mm.
right? And what I mean by that is, you know, I remember testifying before one of the subcommittees, and I told them a story, right? And I said that what the Florida legislature was trying to do with Amendment 4 reminded me of this fictional story of a homeless family, all right, that was forced to live in the elements, rain, sleet, and snow. They're out there, homeless, and politicians walked by them every single day and did not lift a finger to help. And then one day, all of the people in the community got together and said they wanted to do something about it. And they decided to build that homeless family a home. No sooner did they completed building the home, now here comes a politician trying to dictate how to decorate or furnish the home, right? When they had all of the time in the world to do something about it, and they kept kicking the can down the street. But when we, the citizens, came together in the form of a citizens initiative and decided to make change, now uh, um, they want to define what that change looks like. And so I was very um, disappointed in that entire process, and maybe it's because maybe I was taught wrong, right, when I was growing up in school, because I always believed that when you talk about a democracy, we first recognize that all power first reside with each of us as an individual, and that we concede some of that power or acquiesce some of that power in order for us to live together in a society. And when we concede that, we elect certain people to take care of our affairs, right, collectively, right? And they are public servants that are supposed to do what we want, right? And so it gets disheartening when you see that image of what democracy is all about. We don't see much of that today. Now we see politicians who are public servants, who's supposed to be public servants, that's acting as demigods. And basically, in that situation, what they said was, even though we don't want to do anything about it, you, the citizens, decided to take matters in your own hands, but you're not smart enough to do it right. As a matter of fact, and you've seen it play out because even during that time, you've seen a lot of elected officials in Tallahassee wanted to make the ballot initiative even more difficult of a process.
Right.
They wanted to prevent the citizens, who are the true bosses, from deciding, or, policies or laws. And that is totally contrary to what I've been brought up believing democracy is all about. And so that moment, when they finally did pass 7066 and sent it to the governor's desk, yeah, at that time I was very disappointed, and it was because we should have never gotten to this point. I think the legislators should have just succumbed or conceded to the will of the people, of the Florida voters, because they're in there talking, trying to guess what Florida voters meant or what they were thinking about when they voted for it, and they did no research. They asked no
Come on.
questions.
Let's
They
be
just did
real.
it upon
Let's
their own
be
infinite
real.
wisdom.
Let's be real, Desmond. When people voted for that, I'm just going to say it. They thought that meant that when you got out of prison, you got your voting rights back, or you got off parole, you got your voting rights back.
It
Maybe some people might have thought they meant like you had to pay your restitution. I don't know. But nobody thought that you had to go on a scavenger hunt trying to find out
No
how
one.
much you pay, how what your court fees were from 30 years ago that are in some shoebox
Yep.
in literally. We
Yes.
found cases where there were in during the trial where there was a challenge to this law,
Yep.
a a
What?
a shoebox where they filed these
What? What,
how
Dara?
much
Let me
people
just say
owed.
this. Let me just say this, and it's no slight to you or anyone else, right? But there are a lot of people that have a good understanding and a good assumption as to what folks were thinking about when they voted for Amendment 4, right? Let me tell you what I have. I have facts, right? Let
Okay.
me tell you why I have facts.
Okay, good.
Because prior to actually launching the petition, we did extensive research and focus groups throughout the entire state of Florida with every demographic and political affiliations of individuals, and had conversations with the voters themselves, right? And what we do know is overwhelmingly, uh, their thought process when thinking about voting for Amendment 4 was exactly what you said. That when someone came out of prison or someone came out of or finished probation, that they should have the right to vote back, right? They believed in second chances. And this is not just Desmond assuming, but this is coming from hours upon hours and months and months of research and engaging with citizens throughout the entire state of Florida, right? And so I could say this as a fact.
Right. And thank you for informing us of that. I mean, that was what my gut told me was when I looked at it. I, you know, the the idea that your government still wants to make it so hard for returning citizens to reintegrate, to be made to feel whole is you say disheartening. It is sometimes. I find it a little appalling. I was talking. I have a very close family member who is a returning citizen, and this family member and I were talking last night, and I wanted to ask them if it was okay if I shared their story. And we were talking about Amendment 4, and she said that they tried to figure out what their situation was, and it was so daunting that they just gave up. And they work at their employer gives everyone at work the day off on election day. And this family member is very successful in a very integral part of her community and gives back a lot. And she's very successful. And they told me that they feel a lot of shame. They don't want their coworkers to know that they are not allowed to work. That
Wow.
even though they have achieved home ownership,
Mhm.
a nice job, other sort of outward signs of success, that shame is still there.
You're so, I've ran across people whose spouse, I remember one guy, I think he was married like for 14 years, and his wife didn't even know that he had a felony
Wow.
conviction, right? And the other thing that you said that is so important, I tell folks this a lot, is that the one time of the year when American citizens are made to feel the worst is during elections,
Yeah,
right?
you've told me this.
That's the one time when we're told, oh, you're not a part of us, you're not a part of society, you're not good enough, right, to have your voice heard, you're not good enough to vote. We don't get that feeling during Christmas. We don't get that feeling during Independence Day or Valentine's Day or Thanksgiving. But during elections, that's when we're like really made to feel the worst, and it's sad. It's really sad because there's so many folks who may have made mistakes in the past that are doing way better than some folks who never got caught making mistakes. You notice I
Right.
said never got caught
Right.
because I don't think there's anyone right among us who is perfect who's never made a mistake.
Well, I don't think I know for a fact that I don't know anyone who's perfect, and God knows I'm full of flaws myself. I wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening now. We've seen some stories. Lawrence Maurer of the Tampa Bay Times has done of some very good reporting on these arrests of folks who registered to vote and voted and were ineligible and were arrested. And the governor made a big show of these arrests of these individuals. And I think so far the cases have been dropped against them. I don't know if any of them have successfully been prosecuted. But can you talk about what your experience has been with that?
Yeah. So, it always bothers me when you see politics come into play. All right. And my organization has always believed in placing the needs of people above politics, right? And believe it or not, you see it on both sides, even when you talk about just the challenges that people with previous felony convictions face, right? When every research and study has shown that the quicker you allow a person who has made a mistake or been convicted of a felony offense to reintegrate back into their community, the better it is, right, for everyone, because they're more even least likely to commit another offense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yet, because of politics, we see politicians that don't push policies that promote successful reintegration back into the community, right? And so just like that, what we seen with the arrest of individuals, that was politics once again coming into play, right? And it was very disheartening for a couple of reasons, right? Number one is that that has really never been done to this scale in this state, in the history of it. I mean, we've had governors, from Jeb Bush to Charlie Crist to Rick Scott, right, and even before, right, who, they have ruled over administrations or governed over administrations, that from time to time you would have some people who should not have been registered, right? They have approached it way differently, right? The Secretary of State have approached it way differently. Because typically, what happens if there's someone on the voting roll that should not be on the voting roll, that person is notified, right? And that person has the opportunity to challenge the state and said, "No, I should be on the voting roll." The standard of proof, right, to determine whether or not a person should be on the voting roll is the lowest standard of proof there is, right? And it is a preponderance of the evidence, right? And here's the deal, that is the standard that is typically employed when it comes to, whether or not someone could remain on the voting rolls. And here's the deal, if it's found that they should not be on the voting rolls, then they're removed. They're not, arrested, right? They're not in prison. Because here's the deal, when it comes to imprisoning someone or arresting a citizen of this country, the burden of proof is the highest, not the lowest. And it's a beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And so they were using this low standard of proof to determine who can and cannot vote, but then there was applying an action that required a much higher standard, right? And in this case, that you had to show beyond a reasonable doubt that that person knew that they should not be registered to vote
Right.
and did anyhow. Let me tell you what the huge problem was. When the first arrest happened, it happened in Alachua County. In that particular case, the local supervisor of elections went into a jail and told folks, "Hey, you can register to vote." Some of the people there expressed some doubts about it, and the supervisor of elections said, "Hey, don't worry about it. Just give me your name and I will check. And if you're eligible to vote, I'm going to send you a pamphlet in the mail. So if you get that pamphlet in the mail, you can go ahead and register to vote." Well, guess what? A few days later, that person received the pamphlet in the mail. And what did they do? This is a supervisor of elections. This is a state official who's in charge of elections that's telling you that you are eligible to vote, and you go and register to vote. It just so happened that that supervisor of election was wrong. Who should be punished? Who should have their liberty taken? Definitely not the person that relied on the state. The state has the ultimate authority to determine who is eligible and who is not eligible. And the process is so simple. Someone fills out a voter registration form, they turn it over to the state. The state then goes through its system and make a determination. If the person is not eligible to vote, the state rejects them. If the state determines that they're eligible to vote, then they issue them a voter identification card. In every single case, the state of Florida has issued these individuals a voter identification card, giving any reasonable person the assumption that no matter what doubts I may have, the state knows best and they're saying that I'm eligible to vote.
And
It's simple.
yet
And so these arrests are the clear indication that our system is broken, and should before the state should engage in practices that threatens the liberty of any American citizen, they must first make sure that they have dotted their i's, crossed their t's, and have a functioning system that can be relied on. And we know for a fact that they don't.
they still don't, right? They
They still
still
don't.
don't. We still are not able to. I mean, you shouldn't have to hire an attorney. By the way, I want to
You should
mention to
not.
our
Listen,
listeners that Desmond knows what he's talking about when he talks about the law because you went to law
I
school.
went to law school and I have a Juris Doctorate degree from the great Florida International University College of Law. And here's something there. The state knew about this at the very minimum since the Bush Gore presidential election, when thousands of people were erroneously removed from the voting roster in an election that was decided by around 530 votes,
Yeah.
right? And so even back then, they knew that they had issues with this system and they have failed to fix it. Just like they failed to address felon disenfranchisement and we had to take matters in our own hands, they've also failed to fix an election system. And when you talk about election integrity, it starts with your system, not with the individuals, right? If you want to, I tell folks all the time the best way to fight crime is to prevent it from occurring in the first place, right? It's less costly on taxpayers, right? And it's less dangerous, very less dangerous. And so the state had an opportunity to prevent these arrests from happening, and they failed miserably. And rather than taking ownership, right? Because that's what they do to people like me who made mistakes. What they say, we need to take ownership of our mistakes. We need to,
Right.
express remorse and ask for forgiveness, right? But so how come these politicians or the state can't own up to their failure, right, to fix the system, right, and express remorse? Say, okay, yeah, we messed up. We're gonna we're gonna make take an extra effort to try to fix the system. Don't try to shirk your responsibilities and then try to put the burden on the individual, and then even in some cases putting the burden on third party or voter registration organization, because the burden don't lie with them either, right? That the only thing that a third party voter registration organization could do is just help a person get registered,
It's the
but they're not
state's
the ones to determine a
responsibility
person's
to
eligibility.
ensure that their information that
Yeah,
someone who applies is
give correct information.
eligible.
That's it.
Yeah.
And then what do? They turn it over to their local supervisor of elections, which then transmits that information to the Secretary of State Division of Elections, whose job now is to cross-check that information to make sure that you're giving a voter identification card to a qualified person. That does not rest on a third party voter registration organization. It does not rest on the individual. That burden sits squarely, right, on the state of Florida.
We'll be right back with our special guest, Desmond Meade, the executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to a deeper dive with Dara. You know, you also you've overcome so many challenges. I was also there when you were trying to get a pardon from Governor DeSantis and the cabinet. Tell us a little bit about what happened, what you experienced there.
Well, once again, I think I've seen. I think what we've seen was an example of politics getting into play. When you talk about the clemency policies is very plain and simple, right? Basically, you have individuals who did something wrong, who broke the law, who were punished, right? They've served their sentence, right? They moved on with their lives, and at some point they go before the governor and the clemency board and say, listen, I know I've made this mistake, right? But this is what I've done since I've served my time. Would you give me some type of clemency, right? And what the governor and the clemency board does is they look at, okay, what if this person, have this person contributed to society? Have this person made any mistakes after they've served their time? right? What are the positive things that's going on after we know what the crime was, but we know they've been punished for it.
Show
And
us
so
why
when I
you what how you've changed. Show us what you've contributed. Show
yeah,
us what you've done.
and that's what I did. I was like, listen, my record speaks for itself. You know, overcame homelessness and drug addiction, and ended up going to school, having several degrees, even getting a law degree, dedicating my life to giving back. Right, dedicating my life to advocating for the voiceless. Right, and doing it well enough to where I was recognized by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Matter of fact, I think that same year I was actually recognized as Floridian of the Year, right?
Right.
Floridian of the Year,
Yeah.
right? Central Floridian of the Year, right? Along with other accolades. All right, what else do I need to do, right? And I asked to be considered um, for a pardon, and the governor's hang up was the fact that I was court martialed, what, 20 years ago, something like that, you know, and I was court martialed for, and I could say it, shoplifting. That's it. All right. So Desmond shoplifted 20 years ago. Even after he shoplifted, he did even more things, right? But he managed to change his life around. He
Mm.
had a drug addiction, so it's understandable he may have
Sure.
done some bad things, but he's changed his life around and he's doing this great work in the state of Florida, right? The governor just could not get over the court martial, right? Which, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, I mean, if I can't qualify for a pardon, who can? And ironically, there are people who've done less that have gotten pardons,
Yeah.
you know. And so I think it was just a case. It wasn't, I know that wasn't a decision based on merit, because I know I'm more than qualified. Um, it's funny because I had an opportunity to apply for a pardon many years before
Oh.
when Pam Bondi was the attorney general. Um, and Governor Chris was the governor. Of course, he was a Republican at
Oh.
the time.
Yeah.
And we developed a relationship. I developed a relationship with Pam Bondi and even Adam Putnam and
Right.
Governor Chris. And there was opportunity for me to actually get my rights restored much sooner. But what I know my wife had a hard time getting over this, but I turned it down. I did not want to get my rights restored unless I could bring other people along with me.
Hmm.
Right. And so I pressed a pause on that and really dove deeper into the work around felon disenfranchisement. And eventually in 2018, I was able to help lead the Amendment 4 effort. And then it was after that I decided, okay, now I can apply for a pardon.
I
But I
get
didn't
you.
I didn't want to do it until I was able to make sure that there were more people that were able to get their voting rights restored,
Well,
other than just me.
and and it was a kind of a stunning moment when you were there with your wife and your I think your daughter was there with you too, and everyone expected the
And Neil,
and
yeah,
Neil did get his pardon. He got a
no,
pardon.
he's got his civil rights
He got his
restored.
civil rights restored.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Neil did, you didn't. It was kind of a stunning, baffling moment for those of us on the outside. But again, you showed grace. You didn't, you just, you kept it together. And, my hat's off to you because a lot of other people might have had a different response to that. Can you tell me what was it that got you started on this restoration of rights journey?
That was so simple. Let me tell you, when I was homeless for quite some time, and of course addicted to drugs, and I write about this in my book. Let My People Vote.
I was just going to ask you about your book. Yeah, Let My
Yeah,
People Vote. Everyone, you need to run out and buy that.
you would
Desmond
not be
Meade.
disappointed.
You
There's
you
something in
won't
there for
be.
everyone. But I talked about, just being at the railroad tracks, wanting to kill myself, and overcoming that. And while I was in treatment, what I discovered a joy, right? I discovered, and it was a joy that I tell folks I was chasing all of my life and didn't even know I was chasing it, right? And it was basically discovering my purpose. Why am I here, right? Why was I created? And it was so simple. That I'm here to give back. That no matter what position I was in, how little or much money I have or whatever, there was always someone that was worse off than me. There was always something I can do to make my world a better place. And in those moments, I had made a commitment to just serving my community and giving back. And so one of the very first things I did after completing drug treatment was to join an advocacy organization that advocated for homeless people. And there were formerly homeless people who were like the main advocates in this org. And because I joined it, at the time I didn't know that they were part of this coalition of organizations that was focusing on felon disenfranchisement.
Mm.
And I happened to attend a convening, and that's when my eyes were open about the collateral consequences that a person with a felony conviction faces, and how one of the main ones is the loss of their civil rights for life in the state of Florida. And I just thought it was just so disheartening because Florida, at the time, disenfranchised more citizens than any other state in the world, in the country. There were more people at its height. Florida disenfranchised more people than the population of over, I think, 12 U.S. states and territories
Hmm.
and over 40 countries in the world. And we accounted for a quarter of all the people in the country that was disenfranchised. Yeah, they lived right in Florida, right? You're talking about American citizens that, because of a mistake, lost their civil rights for the rest of their lives. Many of them were veterans who actually put their life on the line, their bodies on the line to protect our democracy, come back from war with PTSD and maybe use drugs to self medicate. And now the country is telling them that they're not good enough to have their voices heard. They'll never be a part of our democracy. Or the veteran who could not afford to feed himself that wrote a bad check, right? Remember Howie, he's in Central Florida
Oh
area,
yeah.
wrote a bad check. And for 40 years, he could not get his rights restored,
Right.
a bad check. And so there was something that was inherently wrong as I was going across the state of Florida, talking to people. The most of them didn't even look like me, right? I'm talking to white, conservative. I mean, I'm in Putnam County, I'm in Lake County, I'm in all these counties, talking to just real life American citizens, man, who, once again, what we said at the beginning, are meant to feel like they're not a part of this country. They're made to feel that way, all right, because they made a mistake several years ago or decades ago, and they can't even be a part of their children's lives at the schools. They can't take their kids on school trips, and they can't get jobs. They can't get housing, and they're just ostracized for the rest of their life because simply because they lived in the state of Florida. Because Florida was only one of four states. That was it. Not even Texas or Georgia had archaic policies like that. And so that that stuff just built up in me, and eventually I told folks I was led to start a ballot initiative.
And you got it on the first go round. You didn't, I mean, people, I forget, it was 62, 60. What percentage of the vote did you get?
Um, we got around close to 65%.
65. I'm
Oh
sorry.
yeah,
Yeah.
no shortchange me, Dara.
I'm
Come on now.
sorry. I meant to
Over
look it up,
five.
but the
Listen,
power
hey,
was out and I
over
started
over
panicking.
5.1 million people voted for it. There were a million more people who voted for Amendment 4 than for Governor DeSantis,
I've heard you
right?
say that.
And I could tell you that at that time, around 40% of the people who voted for Governor DeSantis also voted for Amendment 4,
Wow.
right?
That's a really
And
interesting
so
factoid.
that was, to me, I tell folks that one of my proudest moments was realizing that we were able to pass this amendment, not because we promoted hatred or fear, but instead we promoted love. And we showed the world that love can, in fact, win the day, that we don't have to tear each other down. We don't have to be scared of each other, or hate our neighbors to accomplish anything worthwhile, that we can do it by loving each other.
And I'm telling you, listeners, I'm telling you, deeper divas, that this is something that Desmond says all the time. This is kind of your mantra, that we can
Yeah,
do this with love.
of course.
It is really, you live that.
We
Before
accomplished
we
so much more.
Before we finish up, I want to ask you how much that MacArthur Foundation grant, which was, I don't want to embarrass you by naming how much it is, but let's just concede that it's a big pile of money. How much did that change your life?
And listen, I'm still, plain old Desmond. It is really, a lot of times, we, even people that are advocates, don't fully appreciate the sacrifices that we make, um, and the toll that advocacy takes on our bodies, on our families.
Mm,
Um, and so this grant has really allowed me to relax a little bit more, and to be more um, uh, um, attentive to the other aspects of my life, like my family,
mm.
my physical and emotional health as well. And it has alleviated some burdens, and have freed me up to just think more creatively about how we can make the world a better place.
That's awesome. And then let me I want to hear about how many folks you guys have helped, to how many returning citizens you guys have helped to clear off their uh, fines and fees
Yeah.
and get registered to vote. Let's talk. I mean, I'm like Debbie Downer over here,
Yeah. Oh
but
no. Let me tell you
you've
something.
accomplished so much. So let's talk about some of
So
what y'all have got.
so let me just set something clear. Let me set the record clear.
Okay.
Right. Amendment 4 purportedly cleared for 1.4 million people in Florida with previous felony convictions to be able to vote. The legislation that was passed that required the payment of outstanding fines and fees, according to research and data scientists, is believed to impact a little over 700,000 returning citizens, right? Now, let me tell you, I can do the math, right? And if Amendment 4 helped 1.4 million, there's 700,000 people who have outstanding fines and fees. That means that there are at least 600,000 returning citizens that's living in the state of Florida that don't have to worry about fines and fees and can register to vote and be a part of this democracy. So that's one part of it, right? 600,000. Let me tell you, that's a whole lot of votes right there,
That's more
right?
people than live in my city,
Okay,
Tallahassee,
then.
right now.
There you go. And there's enough people to make a difference in their local, state, and national elections.
100%.
All right. And so let's keep that there. But then you have 700,000 who can't. Most who are too poor, and they're forced to choose between putting food on their table or being able to vote, which no American citizen should be forced to do, right? What we did in our response was to fundraise, and we raised, in 2020, we raised over $30 million,
Mm-hmm.
and we took those $30 million and we went throughout the entire state of Florida in various communities, and we were able to help To date, now over 50,000 returning citizens pay off their fines and fees.
It's amazing. You
Um,
didn't just help them with the monetary aspects of it either, right? Didn't you help them figure out how much they had?
yeah,
I mean, because
we did
that
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 legwork.
was that was
We did what the
daunting,
state couldn't do or didn't want to do. We
right?
did that, right? And we went out there and we scoured records, and we got as accurate a number as we could, and we paid that and absolved them of that legal financial responsibility. But let me tell you the other thing that we did there, because what we realized is that, let me tell you something, 2022, the year of COVID, right? The pandemic. Let me tell you what Florida Rights Restoration Coalition did. In going around and paying off these fines and fees, we were not just helping returning citizens. And I'll give you a good example. Brevard County. It was a story in the papers that the clerk of court, because a lot of the courts were shut down, right? Clerk of courts
That's right.
they were in the red, right?
Yep.
And Brevard County clerk of court went to the county commissioner of Brevard County and said, "Listen, we need $500,000. I don't know where you're going to get it, but we need it, or we're going to have to shut the place down. We're going to have to lay people off." Right? This was indicative of what was happening throughout the entire state of Florida. Let me tell you about Brevard, though. The week after, they went to the county commissioner and asked them, "Listen, you got to find the money somewhere to keep us afloat." We showed up in our bus a week later with a check for $532,000.
Wow.
Right. So not only were we helping out returning citizens, Dara, we were saving jobs. We were saving taxpayers' dollars. We were, because our money was going to victim compensation funds and state attorney programs and public defender programs and youth programs. That's where $30 million were going to. Listen, there is no other organization in the state of Florida. Matter of fact, I would even say the state of Florida itself that invested as much money into Florida's economy than the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. And listen, we weren't even done with that. We also distributed over 1 million masks that year and over 500,000 ounces of sanitizers to homeless shelters, jails, prisons, food banks, supervisor of elections office. That's what Florida Rights Restoration Coalition did in 2022, right? And when I look back and think about it, man, it speaks to something real simple. When we advocate for the least among us, everybody benefits. Everybody, right? Because we were trying to help returning citizens, some folks that's one of the most despised in our society, right? And we're an organization of returning citizens who typically is despised in our society, but we were the one that came to the rescue of Florida more than anyone else.
Wow.
More than anyone else.
Well, thank you for doing that. And before we wrap, just want to give us a little update on what y'all are doing right now.
We are going to double down on our focus. We made a commitment when we passed Amendment 4, and even after 7066 was passed, that we are walking every step of the way with the 1.4 million returning citizens who should have unfettered access to democracy. And so we're going to double down on our efforts to push back against these arrests, to make sure we have established a bail fund and a legal defense fund to help people who have been arrested and make sure that they have proper defense. We're doubling down on helping people with their legal financial obligations, as well as identifying over 600,000 returning citizens who don't have any legal financial obligation that can register to vote right now today. And so that's where our focus is going to be, into honoring the spirit of Amendment 4 and seeing it all the way to the end.
And how do folks reach out to you and your organization if they need help
They can come to
or
our
they want to
website.
make a contribution?
Yep. If they need help or want to make a contribution, our website is www.floridarrc.com, floridarrc.com. And then folks needing help could always dial our hotline at 1-877 My Vote Zero. 1-877 My Vote Zero.
There you have it, folks. Buy Desmond's book. Remind me again of the title. I
Oh yeah,
had
you definitely got to buy it. Let my
Let My
people vote.
People Vote. Yeah.
That's right. Let
Buy
my people vote. You
Desmond's
can get it
book.
on Amazon and at different bookstores online.
Let My People Vote. It's got a great photo of him on the cover. Thank you so much, Desmond Meade. As you can
Thank you,
see,
Dara.
I'm a huge fangirl, but thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you'll come back in a couple of months and give us an update.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs LLC and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.